Welcome in, everyone, to the third episode of the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. I am Blake Wallace, your host, joined by my co-host and great friend, Jake Aaron. Today's show is centered all around the NFL Conference Championship. Additionally, we dive into this year's coaching carousel a little bit, a lot of developing news. Even just a few hours ago, the Ravens defensive coordinator finding a new home in Seattle. We're going to talk about all of that in just a few minutes here. And, of course, very lastly, the Blake and Jake Show's very first NBA segment, as we'll be talking a little bit of the All-Star game, All-Star weekend. There's some exciting news, some three-point challenge news that I just cannot wait to get into. But first, we are going to talk about the very first segment of Jake with the weekly sports news update.
Thank you, Blake. I appreciate it. So first off, we're going to start with football. In football news, Jim Harbaugh signed a 5-year, $16 million deal with the Chargers. This comes after Michigan offered him a 10-year, $125 million to stay as their head coach. And you know what? You got to think that money plays a factor. Harbaugh said that his reason for leaving is because he wants to take a chance at winning the Super Bowl. We'll see. In basketball news, it's been a high-scoring week for stars of the league. Last Monday, Joel Embiid scored 70 points against Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs. And on the same day, Karl-Anthony Towns scored 62 points. Then, on Friday, Devin Booker scored 62 points, but he was topped by Luka Doncic, who scored 73 points. Luka's 73-point was tied with David Robinson and Wilt Chamberlain. Chamberlain scored 73 points twice in his career, and that's the fourth most points scored in a game in NBA history. Blake, do you think that there's a coincidence between all these high-scoring performances in the All-Star game coming up?
I don't. In fact, I think that's a direct correlation. These high-scoring performances, even last year, there were a few. I believe Donovan Mitchell was one of them that went for 60, 70, which is, they're just insane numbers. But I've noticed that these players that all seem to just go crazy seem to just be kind of, in one way or another, a very dominant star on a team that goes as that player goes. And it's right around that fan voting time, and that's so important. I mean, Stephen Curry, we're going to talk about it in just a little bit here, but Stephen Curry having the most, and for the first time, that's like not something that heavily sways an opinion. Stephen Curry missing being a starter for the first time in a long time here, and it's just it's kind of catching some people off guard. We're of course going to get in that later, as I said, but and I want to get back to the Chargers thing, and I didn't think I would have anything to say for the Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers thing, but then your reasoning for Jim Harbaugh wanting back, I see that being the real case after winning a college championship. And, you know, I think that life had kind of run its course anyway, and that's his thing. And he moves around. He seems to be a 4-year guy and on to the next challenge. And I think we all know people like that who are just uniquely, they go after something, and once they get it, it's a little bit of a celebration and on to that next target challenge. That's how people live, and Jim Harbaugh is certainly one of those. Go ahead and continue.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So let's keep moving on. 2 days ago, some Mizzou news. Mizzou signed longtime assistant coach Corey Batoon to be their defensive coordinator. He's been coaching for longer than both of us have been alive. He's been coaching for 32 years in some capacity. He led his previous team, South Alabama. They were ranked 15th in total defense with about 313 yards per game. They were tied for 26th with 22 takeaways. That performance would have led the SEC in 2023. Blake, you got any thoughts?
I have so many thoughts, and let's just take, and I love to talk Mizzou stuff, and especially when it's super relevant like this is, and I mean, it's relevant on so many different levels. Batoon being mainly a safeties and defensive backs guy coming in right after Blake Baker, it shows why Mizzou spent 3 weeks for this defensive coach search, and it's a good use of your time. And I know that people might not think that immediately with not really knowing who Corey Batoon was before the hiring, and then of course also, you know, coming out of South Alabama, not you know, it's certainly a huge step up for Corey Batoon, and we've seen that even in the paychecks. The most he had ever been paid was what, like $320,000, and Mizzou now signs him for $1 million annually. Like, I know Blake Baker won when he went to LSU and was already like the sixth highest paid defensive coordinator, and goes from $2 million to $2.5 million with LSU, is now the first. Yay, congratulations. That's a step up. Corey Batoon went from about $320 to $1 million. So what a win for that man. And like you said, well earned. When you put that many years in the sport, it pays off. Just putting the time in and day out, the grind. And what was Missouri looking for is one of my most, it's a little bit of just me getting in the minds of certain people that I've talked to maybe once in passing and seen at a distance a few times. Yet this has been a very well created coaching staff, really from the start, even with the Blake Baker and hiring of Kirby Moore, paying them both quite a bit of money. That's the thing too. It's actually cheaper for Mizzou as well. It's really a win-win. Besides the fact that Eli Drinkwitz and that coaching staff have their work cut out for them this year, but as an organization, saving some money, I guess. I just think that this is a big deal. This is a big deal for all the parties involved, and this is a huge step up. But I think that Mizzou is looking for somebody who wasn't going to change the mold of this Missouri defense, because right now the offense is humming. And I haven't looked at any early projections, but that Cook to Luther Burden connection has to be one of the top connections next year. Those guys both have to be considered once again up for many awards. And I know it's so far out. We don't know what'll happen. We don't know, and knock on wood for injuries and all that. Yeah. Yet it's on the table. It's certainly on the table that the Missouri offense is one of the best offenses in college football. What's also on the table is that the defense could possibly take a step back, and you don't really have time if you're Mizzou to take a year to redefine your defense, especially when you have the number one recruit already committed here in Nwaneri, and you've got to get him in the building and get him acclimated to a system. You want him coming into something where there's a lot of leadership from the upperclassmen, and that the younger guys feel more welcome in their spots. From top down, looking for somebody that was also a defensive backs coach that could come in and play a very similar system. So it's not so much of like, we're going to scrap it and we're going to redo it all. It's okay. What terms, what definitions can we change a little bit to, fit both styles of the team currently, and what Corey Batoon coaches well. And I mean, Corey Batoon has the biggest job. I mean, paid the most, and we could celebrate it all we want. Got his work cut out for him. Calling defense against the SEC is going to be something unlike he's seen in a little bit, because he spent some time at Florida Atlantic, I believe a little bit with Ole Miss, if I'm not correct.
Yes, you're right.
But I mean, not a lot of time, just a year or two, and then on to the next thing, and has spent time at Hawaii as well, just been around the league. So it is a good veteran hire, but at the same time, it really fits this team's timeline. And I think you can only do that. And when you see this, it just means that whoever's leading this organization, everybody who's leading this organization has to be in step, and they have to be focused on one goal in mind. And I think they accomplished that. That's my take on that.
No, I think that was very well said. Like you said, he has his work cut out for him. But I don't know. As a Mizzou fan, I like the challenge. I think it's going to be. I hope at least it's going to work out well for Mizzou.
I agree.
Yep. So moving on, in baseball news, yesterday the Baltimore Orioles got sold to a new ownership group for $1.7 billion. It's reported that legendary Orioles player Cal Ripken Jr. is part of the ownership group, and one can only hope that this ownership group will be active and will do whatever they need to do to help this up and coming Baltimore Orioles team to do what they need to do, because they got some good players right now, and Adley Rushman, they have a good foundation. Hopefully they'll be able to keep that up.
I gotta say, and I'm not a baseball guy, but I love money. I love talking about big money moving, and that's exciting. I just like to see how much these organizations are growing and how much more wealth they're amassing, and it's kind of sick just to think about. I mean, if you have $1.7 billion, then I guess what else are you going to spend it on? That's just an absurd amount of money for a commoner like myself to think of. And I think that wraps up. Does that wrap up our weekly headlines?
That does.
That was a great Sports Weekly update from Jake over here. And I missed this part a little bit earlier, so I'm going to get in real quick. If you want to go ahead and follow our socials, that's where you can check out all of what the Blake and Jake Show have going on. We have a very new Instagram. That is just the Blake and Jake Show, no spaces in between. And if you want to listen to this podcast again, or maybe you didn't catch all of this, or maybe you just want to, catch an update later, maybe you won't catch this whole show, go ahead and check us out on YouTube and Spotify. That's where you'll find the Blake and Jake Show. That one is with no spaces.
And real quick, I just want to add one thing about the Orioles. I just saw that the previous ownership group who sold it, they originally bought the Orioles for $173 million, and then they sold it for $1.7 billion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I
crazy.
mean, the money, the fact that a business could even go to that from that is insane. Wow. I mean, sports in the early 2000s to be around. All right, that moves us into our very first subject, from talking to old money to new money. Now we're talking old sports, then new sports. Conference championship weekend just happened. It's just over. And I'll be honest, it's Wednesday. We have a weekly show. We don't have a daily show. So from Monday and Tuesday, I get to listen to kind of the national media and get their senses of the two games. And I don't bend. I don't break. I still have my opinions, and I've got to be honest, usually my opinions line up in some factor with just the general national media takeaway, at least somewhat. And I've got to say, this is one of the very first weekends. There's only 2 games, and I felt one way about both games, and the national media, I think, has just went overboard. Maybe with it is just being 2 games, and they have so much they've got to break down. They dig a little deep, but I've got to be honest, both games were spectacular. Right? Both games coming down to the wire. And you got one of both. Like, how perfect, how even, how match up. We got spectacular plays. We had high-flying offense in our second matchup with the Lions and the San Francisco 49ers, who we're going to talk about first when we break them down. But the Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens was interesting as well. And I know that's a little bit more to the fans that like defense and maybe want to see some good defensive effort. I enjoyed both games equally. I thought both were different in themselves, but I think them together was perfect. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I just want to point out, I'm sure y'all saw it on social media, but that play, I'm not a huge football watcher, but man, when Lamar Jackson, when he threw that ball, it got tipped, and then he caught it and ran for a little bit. That was such a crazy play. I loved seeing that. I watched that play over and over. It was really exciting.
And despite, you know what, I'm not even going to get into that just yet. Let's go ahead and just get our outro on the Detroit Lions. I don't think this was a game that many expected them to win, yet in the first half, it looked like nobody was going to expect San Francisco 49ers to come back because, man, Detroit got out to the biggest lead of the weekend despite, coming away with one of the 2 losses of the weekend. What were your thoughts on that first half there? And what were your thoughts? Did you see anything wrong in that first half on either side?
The Lions just seemed so dominant. They're really, I honestly, first half came to an end. I'm like, oh my gosh, they might do it. This could be it. The Lions could be going to the Super Bowl. My guy, Dan Campbell, was going to do it, but no, didn't end up working out for him.
No, and I've got to say, looking at some of those final plays, and I didn't like either of them. I understand that Dan Campbell is an aggressive guy. I understand that he's created a very successful culture there. What Dan Campbell and the rest of that coaching staff have to do now, and luckily for this coaching staff, they get Ben Johnson back for another year, because a loss at offensive coordinator with a special talented offensive coordinator as Ben Johnson is, I think this would have been doomsday for the Detroit Lions. I see the Detroit Lions as both very talented, very special, could be a great thing for a long time. And I also see them on the brink of being everything they've been for so long. And it's really how they deal with success. I don't want to sound like Aaron Rodgers here, but it is how the Lions are going to deal with this year, because this is how the Lions should be handling this year. That was a freaking spectacular year. That was 100%. That's the best year they've had since, 19? Why are we angry? Be happy. Be excited. But pat Dan Campbell on the back. It's okay. It's okay. Guess what? We haven't seen this. It's so spectacular for Detroit Lions fans. And then I felt like maybe it's the national media. Maybe it is just some weird Lions fans that just can't accept just happiness for a little bit. Maybe they're just so used to being unhappy. They just couldn't finish a season happy for once. But it's like, you got everything you wanted, and this team went as far as it should have, going exactly how it is. This is how things happen. Now, it's up to Dan Campbell. It's up to Ben Johnson. It's up to the entire coaching staff that was luckily retained to get back into the building and reshape their philosophy.
Now, I haven't been following too closely about what's been said in the last few days, but I remember seeing Dan Campbell's press conference afterwards. He was so down. I mean, you can't really blame him for that, but I was a little, I don't know what the right word is, but concerned isn't the right word, but it was a little like, whoa, man, why'd you say that when in his comments of like, this might be the farthest we'll get, or it was something along those lines. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. I believe he said this might be our best chance. What are your thoughts on that?
I first of all, great question. And I remember that and we hadn't talked about that at all in this preparation, but I remember that as well because I took it a little bit differently because I think at first it hit my ears wrong. But then I think at that moment in time, you could tell the sorrow that it hit him, the regret even, and I think it's okay to admit regret. I don't like the Brandon Staley, I'm going to never admit I was wrong publicly. Like, this is a chance for growth with the Lions, who have never had success, finally have success in their first season, doing it one way, and now you see, okay, we got there, and we see what it takes now to finish. And I think it's so clear for this team that there have to be changes. That's why I was encouraged, and I'm even more encouraged when they keep their coaching staff, because now you go in there and you say, okay, when it comes to playoffs, no, we're aggressive. We could be aggressive all regular season. When it comes to the playoffs, you can't do that. That's just simply not a part of playoff football, because in the playoffs, and this is why Coach Belichick ended up being one of the best, and best when paired with one of the best Tom Brady, or the best Tom Brady, because it created an impossible duo. The two would not make mistakes whatsoever, right? And they would just wait. And the game is already high stress. It gets more high stress the less time there is, the closer it is. We saw the Ravens, right? As time was ticking down, the Chiefs didn't score in the second half of that game. I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit, and I'd like to jump all over the place, but the Ravens didn't score, or I'm sorry, the Chiefs didn't score in the second half of that game. The Ravens were feeling the crushing, that offense, every time they didn't score. And it was like the score wasn't even going up at this point. It felt more like quicksand to the Baltimore Ravens. I think it was perfect for Detroit Lions, exactly how everything went. I get that you were that close. I mean, if you could have got to the Super Bowl with that first half, spectacular. But the way it went out, I think it breeds the most need for changes in that Detroit Lions organization, while keeping the same guys and understanding that what they have is it's the answer. They've just got to tweak it a little bit.
Do we have time? Can I make a quick rebuttal to what you said earlier? So you mentioned about, being really aggressive in the regular season, but then, dialing it down a little bit in the playoffs. I think my philosophy would be, dance with who brought you. If you're going to be that aggressive in the regular season, why not be that aggressive in the playoffs? Because that aggressiveness in the regular season was in part why you got to the playoffs.
I would agree if I considered regular season football and playoff football the same football. I don't. And I don't know. I'm pretty sure I'm right in not thinking that. Think about the mindset of a 17 game season over this is it. One quarter, I might get a drive, I might not get back on the field. It's a totally different feel, right? It's right now, it's urgent. If we don't score here, we have to scramble, because we'll figure it out next week when we head into Cincinnati. You've just got to figure it out right there. It stresses every part of what football really is. It's going to test your coaching and how you're going to make your adjustments. It's going to test you how you are in late game. It does all of that. That is why Belichick and Brady were the best. They didn't make mistakes, and they were the most prepared. And each game, if it came down to any of those two things, everybody already kind of knew it would come out to Tom Brady and Belichick in the end, and it did. And I think that's the real reason why I think the Detroit Lions are on a great track, as long as the fans don't listen to that national media about hating on Dan Campbell. Let it go. Let the man grow. The same point, don't reinforce Dan Campbell to be just Riverboat Ron, right? Where is Riverboat Ron anyway? Not getting his head coaching spot back with the Commanders, that's for sure. I just think that it's different. In the regular season, it's great, but you can't just be all the time aggressive in the playoffs, because the playoffs is more about the mistakes you don't make than the plays you make. In fact, we'll go ahead and stay in the Belichick and Tom Brady era. Can you name one risky play that they did right now that paid off, but it was a huge risk, maybe didn't have to do it?
I cannot.
No, you can't. All right, and I'll rest my case right there. And let's talk about the 49ers. And I think we talked about it a little bit. I don't think their playoff run has been good so far. I think they've been incredibly shaky. I don't know if that would be your take on it. I think that the Packers were a great team, of course. I do think that the 49ers should have won that by 2 scores comfortably in a perfect world. If expectations of what people believe in a regular season were true, that would have been a deeper win. And then, of course, being really tested against the Lions. And really, the Lions were the one that lost that game. The 49ers, they took advantage of every opportunity, of course, went out there and got it. But that was more about the Lions not making 1 or 2 necessary plays or not just being patient enough to let the end of the game play out, really. And I've got to say that, I've got to think that the 49ers can't feel any better than 4 years ago going up against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, because I just don't know. I get Purdy is better than Garoppolo for the 49ers. I like the running ability in the second half. He had 3 runs over 10 yards, 2 runs over 20 yards, and I believe just 5 attempts on the whole game. So when he ran, it was crucial, and it was there were big momentum plays. So I liked that. And what I also liked about Purdy was, the first half wasn't the best. The second half was way better. That's something you didn't get with Garoppolo. But is Purdy much better than Garoppolo? At the end of the day, I don't think it's enough to go from a Super Bowl loss to a Super Bowl win, especially because this Chiefs team, it's not better than the 4 years ago, but it certainly is different, and it's still really, really tough, and it's a whole puzzle to solve. And the Ravens were the team that were supposed to solve it, because the Ravens are a lot like the 49ers and whooped the 49ers in the regular season. Yet the Chiefs, of course, when it goes to playoff, just like Belichick and Brady, it's once again, it's about the team that's going to do it all right. And Patrick Mahomes didn't have a great day. Let's go ahead and get into it, because we've talked about it 4 times despite not having gotten to the Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens and Lamar Jackson versus Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator for the Chiefs, that needs to be studied, because he has some inside knowledge of some sort. He's all the blitzes just seemed to catch. It seemed like everything that was thrown at Lamar Jackson caught him off guard. And I don't feel like it was exactly the pressure of the moment. I didn't feel like the pressure was too big. I feel that way sometimes with Josh Allen. Whenever the game's on the line, is he going to make a silly goofy throw? Is he going to do something goofy and run back 30 yards? I don't feel that way when I watch Lamar play, even playoff football this year. But I did feel like everything that the defense threw at him, he wasn't prepared for. And that might be an issue going forward. But the Ravens just lost their defensive coordinator, McDonald, to the Seattle Seahawks. So they've got a lot to do as far as replacing. Their cap is pretty expensive next year, too. So maybe we got to look at moving some players around and so on and so forth. But what does this mean for Lamar Jackson? 2 MVPs, 0 conference championship wins. It's kind of strange territory, really. Yeah. And we talked a little bit about, I don't know if you remember, in week 1, we talked about McDermott and how all those coaches that have been employed since 2017 have won a conference championship. It's very much the same thing with Lamar. Anybody that has 2 MVPs has at least gotten to the conference championship and won it. And Lamar's really at the bottom of that list as far as achievements for people with 2 MVPs. What kind of pressure does that put on Lamar?
I think it puts a ton of pressure on Lamar, honestly. To have 2 MVPs but not have any conference championship wins, that's not a complete resume, You want you got to get over that hump. And that's something he hasn't been able to do yet.
Yeah. I agree with you. And Mahomes and Reed are just so tough to go against. It's a tough year in, year out matchup. The duo have been there together. That had the front office has been locked in tighter than, the tightest screw for, what feels like about 10 years now, really making it feels like every right decision. I have to think that that's going to continue. What I really liked was Patrick Mahomes. And if you look at the numbers, it's not going to look great. You see complete a lot of passes for not a lot of yards, not a lot of touchdowns. But the eye test, it's the eye test. And when you know Patrick Mahomes is really the best quarterback in the league still, and somehow, despite maybe none of the numbers being up, it feels like Patrick Mahomes is taking his game to the next level.
Yeah. I mean, it's in my opinion, as somebody who's not like the top football fan, I feel like Mahomes is just he ramps it up in the playoffs. Would you agree with that?
I agree, he ramps it up in the playoffs, but I'm more mean just this year. And in fact, with all the challenges of the receivers and everything, just eye test alone, this is the best Patrick Mahomes and I think it's great that you pointed out in the playoffs, because so many times in the playoffs we've seen Patrick Mahomes with these knick-knack injuries constantly, and I this is the rightest as rain as I think he's playing. I think he's on top of his game right now. I'm sure he's still having those injuries, but as far as the mental and the showing up, I don't think I've ever seen Patrick Mahomes as 100% as late as this is, and it's certainly spectacular. And my last note for, of course, conference championship weekend leading up to the Super Bowl in just 2 weeks, I've got to say, that connection with Andy Reid and Spagnuolo have been spectacular as a coaching staff, and both seem to flawlessly transition into a more cohesive football unit from all three. And they've always been that way, because earlier they would used to play like the offense was the top dog, like it was when you had Tyreek and Kelsey was in his heyday, and the defense was meant for playing with a lead, getting stops, and it was fluid. And sometimes when you see these teams have to make the change on the offensive side, it doesn't represent that on the defensive side. The defensive philosophy doesn't change to keep the offensive and defensive balance. And the Chiefs did that flawlessly this year. The offense took the time. The defense carried the torch while it needed to. And now, the defense is amazing. The offense is good. But when you have somebody like Patrick Mahomes, that upgrades your offense to great. So even in those tiny moments, even though for most of the year the Kansas City Chiefs offense has been good or really good, it's going to be great when it matters. And I think that's just why the Kansas City Chiefs have to feel good going into this playoffs, into the Super Bowl, and we're not going to talk about the Super Bowl too much this week, but 2 points favorites right now for San Francisco.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Hit me up.
All right, so let's say that the I know you said we're not going to talk about Super Bowl, but I have a kind of a Super Bowl question.
Okay.
So let's say we're in the Super Bowl and the Chiefs 49ers game starts out like first half is like the Lions and the 49ers game, where the Chiefs get out to a lead. I believe it was 21-7. Do you think that the 49ers would be able to come back to that?
No chance. Once the Chiefs get a lead on the 49ers, that's 2 scores. Pacheco is going to run the ball. Kansas City Chiefs are going to make no mistakes, because there's going to be no fear when it goes to the final possession. I feel like every time it does that, it's Mahomes time, it's Reid time, and if you're going to count it down to a few plays and going to ask me which side I'm going to take Kansas City Chiefs. I think that's the main difference. All right, we are going to take our one break. When we get back, we're going to talk about the coaching carousel ending maybe a little bit before we thought. And lastly, we're going to talk about the NBA All-Star. That's the debut of our NBA topics, but there's going to be so much more NBA in the future. It's just a little bit of like a christening, a little bit of a debut, and just so excited to talk it. You're listening to the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. All right, and welcome back from that short break. This is the Blake and Jake Show. If you want to go ahead and follow along, catch us on our Instagram, the Blake and Jake Show, no spaces. And later, this will be on YouTube and Spotify. That is the Blake and Jake Show with spaces. And let's go ahead and get into our very second topic of the day, which is, so far, the coaching carousel has grinded to a complete halt. And so many things happening all at once in the few hours, but next thing you know, there's only one coaching hire available. We'll go ahead and start it out. I think people will not be shocked and have already been caught up on Gerard Mayo, who has had that job for a few weeks, an in-house hire for the Patriots. They, of course, let go of Bill Belichick this season, who has not found a home. The Raiders let go of Josh McDaniels and in-house hired Antonio Pierce. And I'm not exactly sure that was the best hire, but ownership was held hostage a little bit by the players inside of the room, and a little bit. I believe that was Crosby was saying, "Hey, if it's not Antonio Pierce, I don't think I want to be here." And that's tough. That's tough to fight from an ownership group. Yet I do feel like it's hard to tell yourself that the best answer for you is in the building, especially if you're the Raiders, who have not had a lot of success lately. But we'll see this year on how that turns out. The Titans, of course, let go of Mike Vrabel, another head-scratching drop there, and hire Brian Callahan from the Cincinnati Bengals, the offensive coordinator. Did not call offensive plays, though, for the Chargers, so a lot in question there. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and there's good track records for this. So moving on there. The Chargers, of course, firing Brandon Staley. I think that's a year too late, but they found possibly the best coaching candidate on the market in Jim Harbaugh, coming off a college football championship this year for the Michigan Wolverines. And the Panthers firing Frank Wright and what feels like their 1 billionth coach in 10 years and hire Dave Canales. And I think in a lot of when we were talking about our coaching carousel last week, we discussed a lot of bigger names than Dave Canales. But simply, I'm not exactly sure if the Panthers could attract any of the names that were spoken of, whether you're talking about the offensive coordinators that headed back to their team, Ben Johnson, and wow, that's Skronik. Oh, messing up. Bobby Slowick. Sorry about that. Bobby Slowick. I was Skronik. I was going somewhere weird with that. But I don't think the Panthers could pull any of those in the building, especially with their recent track record in firing head coaches. And the Falcons get rid of Arthur Smith. Now, Arthur Smith goes to Pittsburgh now and is their Pittsburgh offensive coordinator that was embattled for I'm pretty sure the whole year with Steelers fans and Matt Canada out again. And Raheem Morris will be taking that spot for Falcons head coach. A great hire there. The Seahawks recently, as in just a few hours ago, hire Mike McDonald, defensive coordinator from the Baltimore Ravens. And we talked about that for the Baltimore Ravens. And the Hardballs always seem to have a plethora of defensive guys to pull from here. So I don't feel like that's a huge hit for the Ravens. And, of course, Mike McDonald staying with the Birds, going to Seattle and to a team that is interesting. I think the Seattle's was one of the easiest teams to read and wanting a young coordinator. I'm shocked that they didn't go offensive coordinator, but a lot of their talent on their team currently consists, I believe, on the defense. So I'm not floored by the hire there. And that leaves our one last opening. We talked a little bit about it, maybe even jokingly, about the Washington Commanders. Ron Rivera being the coach is out, but no coach has been named so far. I am going to just ask you a little bit on the spot here. What's going on with the Washington Commanders head coaching job?
Ooh, I am not too sure. I don't know. Based off of their record, I'm not too sure they're going to be able to get a top-notch guy that's left,
Yeah, when you talk about record, I'm not sure you're just talking about win-loss record, but also just the record of the franchise.
Right.
Yeah, and it is a sore spot for me. And you think about the coaching candidates that are still out there. How is Mike Vrabel not already in the building? Because if I'm thinking about, and maybe it's Mike Vrabel's choice, and I would understand that 100%. And maybe there's also a conflict because the Titans organization, they were skilled, got to the playoffs, but were not. They were always a strange franchise as far as what direction they were heading in. It never felt like it was an organized group from top to bottom, and that's what I saw there from his entire tenure there. So if that is, behind closed doors on Mike Vrabel, I would understand. But you got to think the Commanders have to bring somebody in who's a strong culture setter. That could be Dan Quinn, but it's hard for me to hire Dan Quinn if Mike Vrabel's still on the market, if I'm just a face value of what they are. It's hard to sell your fans on that. And maybe you do. The thing is we can name all these great names, right? We can say every top coordinator out there, and we can talk about every head coach that's still out there looking for a job. The Commanders are it's a guesswork right now on where they're going as far as we're concerned.
Let me ask you this. What do you think the Commanders need most? Is it a culture reset? Is it somebody who's just good with the X's and O's? You know what I'm asking?
I think it just depends on who you get, because let's just talk in hypothetical here. If today the Washington Commanders come out and say, we got Bobby Slowick or we got Ben Johnson, that's an A+ hire, and congratulations. Yet they need a culture setter. So if you get Vrabel, I think of that as an A hire. I don't think that is an A+ hire. I think both those names I just mentioned as offensive coordinators have to feel like you're taking a chance, of course, because they've only been coordinators, but the payoff could be spectacular, and they've done spectacular things as coordinators. I understand that taking a coordinator that's at the top of his game.
Do you think there's such thing as an A+ hire for them?
Those two out there currently, right
those
now,
are A's,
if it's not Mike Vrabel, I wouldn't, or Belichick. You can't give Belichick a B. If it's Pete Carroll, you can't give him a B. It's probably not going to be either of those three, but those are your only A's, I think, left on the table. The B's, the only other A's would have to come out of left field, I believe. The B's, they're out there. There's B head coaching hires, and to be honest, you might be prohibited from purchasing the A's if you're the Washington Commanders. That's just how I feel about that. And really, I think that just about wraps up this year. And I think when you look at how strange, and I started with unique and I ended on strange on this coaching carousel. It wasn't a normal carousel. And one of the reasons is you had bigger names than usual on those carousels. And each year, it's kind of the same equation for finding a head coach and a team. Usually these teams are bottom of the league teams looking for a head coach to pull them out of something. So they're not exactly great hires. And then there's really only one or two great head coaches available. Any others you're going to have to trade for, or some other, you have to go find them yourself that have never been found before. You can't just, go out there and get one. Well, this year you can. There's a lot of them. But we're coming to the fact that these teams all have directions that they want to go. And teams with directions where they want to go don't suddenly want to surrender all of that to somebody else to say, you're going to take us in this direction, you're going to go. And I think that's why Bill Belichick is sitting out. It feels like the best case for Bill would be to sit out for a year and for a team in week 2 to say, hey, this is not working right here. We're going to need something better. Maybe you don't even bring Bill in during the year. You leave that coach in at the end of the year. You already have something in place with Belichick where you kind of slide into what will be a well planned out, comprehensive, and maybe what feels like a little bit more of a compatible between the head coaching, the front office and Bill Belichick, maybe a compatible vision. But there's been no time to build that compatible vision for these head coaches that deserve to have their vision viewed as compatible by these franchises, because these aren't the top of the franchises. If you were saying that Belichick was going into the Chiefs, then you'd say the Chiefs have all of the momentum, but none of these teams, the Seahawks, the Commanders, even the Falcons, Panthers, Titans, Raiders, none of these are the top flight teams. The one top flight head coach just coming off of all the success with some baggage, but not a lot of baggage as it pertains to the NFL. Most of that's in the college football realm, and he'd be leaving that baggage. And then you've got the Chargers, who have the one or two pieces that make the Chargers not one of those normal head coaching positions that would just suck. And you get that one matchup. There usually wouldn't be a lot of other great head coaching offers out there, and there's not any more teams out there. And I think that is the symptom of just a very strange coaching carousel. And that will bring us into our very last topic, where we get into the NBA and the All-Star Week. Jake, go ahead and take away.
Yeah, so one of the biggest news coming out of the NBA regarding the All-Star weekend is that Steph Curry, who's the NBA all-time three-point leader, will face off against WNBA single season three-point leader Sabrina Ionescu. So in case you're wondering how this contest is going to take place, Curry is going to shoot from the NBA three-point line with NBA basketballs, and Ionescu will shoot from the WNBA three-point line with WNBA basketballs. So here's the interesting thing, all right? In 2023, in the 2023 WNBA three-point contest, Ionescu only missed 2 shots, which is just insane. She made 25 of 27 shots. She scored 37 points because of Moneyballs. And the player who previously had the most record in NBA or WNBA for most points was Curry. So this is going to be a really interesting, I think it's going to be a really fun contest. Personally, I have Ionescu winning this out. I think her performance in the last All-Star three-point contest was phenomenal. Like I said, she only missed 2 shots. I also think she wants to prove to the world that she's the best three-point shooter out there for her sport. So, another reason also I forgot to mention, Curry is a 2-time three-point champion, but he's lost the three-point contest 5 times. So, like I said, I think it's going to be Ionescu. I think this is going to be a 6th loss for Curry. What do you think?
Yeah, and I'm just gonna take this my own way real quick, and then
Sure.
I'll end with your answer because I want to start with the terrible Brittany Griner versus DeMarcus Cousins take there, and how much I hated that. You know, and I think a lot of NBA fans hated that, and WNBA fans, hang in with me because this does have a positive take for everybody here. But that was just silliness, right? And it didn't lend credibility. I think that's the problem. It didn't lend credibility to anybody, and it was just really taken as a laughing matter when there are things like this matchup right here that has me peaked. I am absolutely excited to see these two go head to head because I think this is a real matchup that Steph Curry could be really tested here by Ionescu, and I'm just pumped about it. Curry is the best three-point shooter in the NBA ever. I just want to see him dethrone. There's a little part of me that always wants to see that just be toppled a little bit, but we've got to talk about Ionescu saying, I'm comfortable going to that NBA three-point logo. I read something where she actually said that. In that matchup, I'm going to go ahead and give it to Curry. I think that's a bad move. I don't remember if she said anything about using the men's balls or anything like that. I hope she wouldn't. I would want, as a shooter, you just have to say, like, keep everything as constant as you want.
Yeah.
And I want to see her win. So, maybe we make it a 2-day event. And if she wins the WNBA, then she challenges on the NBA. She beats him out the NBA. Then, I don't know, Curry has to, like, carry her out of the stadium on a gold chariot or something. This is spectacular, though. This is what I want to see in an All-Star weekend. I want these fantasy matchups to catch me, and I want them to drag me to All-Star weekend. And in fact, oh man, am I going to jump ship all over the pre-planning notes that we had? I'm going to go ahead and let you take that away, end that, and then move on to our next segment.
Sure. So, you want me to talk about like what?
All right, let's go ahead and talk about I think it's great. Do you have any finishing remarks? Then go ahead and start.
Yeah.
Next.
There's one thing I want to point out. The last kind of gimmicky thing I remember. I don't know if you remember this. Draymond Green 3-point contest against Kevin Hart? Do you remember that?
I do remember this.
I think that was fun. That was funny. That was a complete joke. I think this is kind of the opposite of that. I think this is fun. This is serious though, and I think this is what I want to see from these two leagues. This is how I want these two leagues to kind of connect with each other, and I think it's great for both the men's and the women's game.
I hadn't actually thought of it as them, working together and connecting and making an even better All-Star weekend. But you're right. The WNBA and the NBA have mutually worked together here and created an interesting add to an All-Star week, because All-Star week is just tough, right? And let's, even when you get down to the All-Star game, which is like the centerpiece, the crown piece for All-Star week, it lacks some interesting. There's been some things, the Kobe and going to a certain points in the end. That was interesting, right? Yet that has already been scrapped and done away with. This year, there's been a lot of changes. Are you ready to take away your East and everything?
Yeah. So here are who I think will be the Eastern, or who I think should be the Eastern All-Star starters. So I'm going to go with
Can you go ahead and tell us, do you know who are the Eastern?
Yes.
Go ahead and give us
Yes.
the all Eastern,
All
then
right.
tell us who
So
you
right now, we have Damian Lillard, Tyrese Halliburton, Jason Tatum, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Joel Embiid. All right.
I see no arguments.
So I see one argument, and that argument is instead of Damian Lillard, I would rather have seen Jalen Brunson start ahead of him. I mean, look, Lillard's having a good season. There's no arguing that, but Brunson. And I'm a Mavs fan. I really like Jalen Brunson, but I mean, here's the deal. He's averaging a career high in points. He's shooting over 40% on 3-pointers. And this past month, or in January, he's ranked 5th in points per game, 9th in assists. He has 4 40-point games this season, which matches his complete total from all of last season. He's leading his team right now against teams that are below 500, haven't lost a game this season. I want to see Jalen Brunson be an all-star starter.
I'll tell you, I had an argument in my mind for about 30 seconds there that I loved against your argument, fighting for Lillard over Brunson. And as I thought about it, it actually goes against my take for my Western Conference. So I am going to decide for listeners to agree with you so I don't ruin my own take.
All right, nice. So, I mean, all the I will say though, I agree with the other all-star starters. I think everybody made a good choice. I let me say real quick, I was a little surprised, but at the same time, very happy for Tyrese Halliburton, just because he plays in like a small market. But at the same time, he played for the Pacers. The Pacers are hosting the All-Star game. He's leading his team in the league in assists right now. I'm very happy for him. I think it's a very well-deserved all-star starter selection.
I like that. And for the West, the West is going to be it's a tough group to argue. On mine, I tried to come up with a snub or two, and I've heard some snubs. I've just not heard any that make a lot of sense with me. You got some spectacular players. Of course, LeBron James for his 20th All-Star appearance, and Kevin Durant, who seems to have been there forever as well. Nikola Jokic, can't argue that one. Luka Doncic has been an absolute monster this season, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And to be honest, there's no snubs. And the reason there's no snubs is because there's simply just too many elite players in the West right now for everybody to get just a few slots. And I see, and we're going to talk about it, the Thursday tomorrow, we're going to get the reserves for the All-Star game, and that's when some hearts are going to really be broken, especially in the West. There's so many guards that could really get a reserve spot here. Obviously, the top name is Curry, who killed in the fan vote, yet was kind of one of those surprise slips off of the starter team. And now you've got to ask, does Curry stay on the starter team for the West? Do you have any opinions on this? In fact, I'm going to give this a better question. I have 3 different guards. Now, I didn't really pick like a point guard versus guard, shooting guard, because their 1 and 2 guard is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Luka Doncic, who are both massive individuals for a 1 and 2 guard.
Yeah.
So I just grabbed 3 guards, and I'm going to give them to you right now. And I want you to tell me which one does not make it onto an all-star team here. I've got Stephen Curry, Anthony Edwards, and Devin Booker.
Okay, it's tough, but I got to go with leaving off Devin Booker. Personally, I would rather see Anthony Edwards. Look, they're all having fantastic seasons. It's hard to argue that. But personally, Edwards would just be such an exciting addition. I believe he was an all-star last year as well. Man, I just keep going back to that one play. Look, the all-star game's fun, right? I want to go back to that, the olden days, T-Mac doing that off the glass in-game. Man, Anthony Edwards did that in a game recently. Edwards leading his team to the number one team in Western Conference right now. So, and Curry's Curry. So I got to leave off Devin Booker.
That's crazy to me. So of all 3, you have to leave out Curry. This is my quick argument before we go. Curry right now is averaging 27.5, 5-4, 12th in the West. Anthony Edwards, 26 points a game, 5-5, but they're number 1 in the West. And then Devin Booker is 28.4 points per game. Now check this out. He's 5th in scoring. KD is 6th in scoring, despite already getting onto the list. He has 28.3 3 points per game, and of the 7.3 assists to go along with that for Booker. And their team is 6th in the West. I don't see how you leave out Booker and Edwards, so it's going to be hard for Curry to find a spot on this. That closes the book on the 3rd episode of the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. It's an exciting part of the year and a good launch point to where we want this show to be. If you enjoyed listening, check us out on Instagram. That's where you're going to catch all the newest happenings. That's the Blake and Jake Show, no spaces. If you only caught part of the show, or maybe you want to listen to the whole show over again, check us out on Spotify or YouTube at the Blake and Jake Show. It's been an absolute pleasure. We hope to see you next week, 2 to 3 p.m. on Wednesday for another episode of the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. Thank you for listening.